Hello. Tonight we are not only traveling back in time, but also embarking on a spatial shift to the heart of New York City over 100 years ago. Let your mind drift to a spring night in 1898 in a small apartment in Manhattan, an area today located just a few miles south of the bustling Central Park. You will find yourself standing in a dim hallway, breathing in the scent of old paper, printing ink, and the briny air from the Atlantic Ocean blowing through the cobblestone streets. There, in the stillness of the night, a life is about to begin. A life where intellect would become a brilliant gift, but also one of the loneliest sentences in history. Perhaps our souls could hardly endure being born and shouldering such a massive weight of expectations like that boy. Just imagine, while other children were still learning to roll over, you were already facing the burning eyes of your parents' extreme beliefs. A father who viewed you as a perfect laboratory subject for psychological theories, a mother who abandoned her entire medical career just to mold you into an intellectual saint. The world around you offered no sweet lullabies, only the steady clatter of a typewriter and cold logarithmic figures surrounding you from the cradle. You are listening to William Sidis Biography for Sleep on the Mind Manor channel. Before we lie down together and completely relax our bodies, please take a second to hit like and subscribe to the channel. It is a way for kindred spirits to find each other amidst this vast night. And don't forget to leave a comment about where you are listening from and what time it is, so I know where your night begins, and we can move through these quiet hours together. Now, please dim the harsh lights, turn on a fan, or adjust the room temperature to be perfectly comfortable. Let your breath flow naturally. Feel the weight of your body gradually sinking into the soft mattress. Together, we will begin the journey of stepping into the life of William James Sidis, the world's most intelligent person, but also the loneliest traveler on a quest for anonymity. The New York night of 1898 is waiting, and the story is about to begin. Part 1. Born in New York and Early Education. You open your eyes in the middle of an April afternoon in 1898 in a small apartment in New York City, where the air is thick with the scent of old paper and humidity blowing in from the Hudson River. You do not know that, from your very first breath, your life no longer belongs to yourself, but is part of a grand project, an experiment on the limits of human intelligence. Your father, Boris Sidis, a man with eyes burning with intense conviction, stands there, looking at you like a precious lump of clay waiting to be molded. Your mother, Sarah, brushes the sweat from her forehead. Her gaze contains not only maternal love, but also the expectations of a woman who abandoned a brilliant medical career to devote her entire mind to the tiny being that is you. You are William James Sidis, a name given after your great godfather, the psychologist William James, like a prophecy of a destiny bound to transcendental ideas. Around your crib, instead of colorful toys or sweet lullabies, are towering bookshelves and the steady clatter of a typewriter. Your father carries memories of cold prison cells in Berdichev, Ukraine, where he was once imprisoned just for daring to teach literacy to poor peasants. He fled those bloody purges to come to this land of freedom, carrying the iron belief that intellect is the only weapon for survival. In Boris's mind, you are not a child needing protection, but a psychological entity needing activation, he often says. Parents cannot too soon begin the work of bending the minds of their children in the right direction. You feel the warmth of your father's hand as he places wooden blocks with printed letters into your tiny palms. The rough texture of the wood and the sharpness of those lines begin to imprint deeply into your subconscious. Your mother, the woman who overcame every gender barrier to graduate from medical school, now uses her knowledge of anatomy and physiology to monitor your every pulse of development. She does not tell you Grimm's fairy tales. Instead, she reads to you about the structure of human organs and how nerves transmit information. Your home becomes a monastery of knowledge, where every meal and every sleep is calculated to optimize the capacity for absorption. Your father believes the brain is like a muscle. If not exercised, it becomes weak and stagnant. He writes in his notes, "Before a baby can talk, his mind is there. It is a tool that may be sharpened if his parents are always reasonable, truthful, and logical with him. Minds are built with use. Muscles are not built by lying in bed. Encourage this baby of ours to think, to walk down every path his fancy dictates, as long as he is interested. Answer all his questions as far as you can go, and as long as he asks." You begin to communicate with the world not with meaningless babbling, but with concrete and clear concepts. When you are only 6 months old, amidst the quiet space of the room, you look toward the oak door and utter your first word, door. It is not the call for mother or father expected by most families, but the identification of an object, an exit, a spatial transition. A month later, looking through a window blurred by night mist, you point toward the silver glow in the sky and say, "Moon." Your parents look at each other, a radiance of satisfaction mixed with pride on their faces. You see yourself as an explorer, discovering a new continent, where every word is a landmark, every sound a key unlocking deeper layers of meaning. By the 8th month, you can already use a spoon to feed yourself skillfully. Your small hands are used not only to put food in your mouth, but also to rearrange the wooden alphabet blocks in the exact order your father taught. You do not need help. You crave order and systems. While children of the same age are still taking their first wobbling steps, you have already begun your journey across the pages of books. By the time you are 18 months old, the image of a boy in diapers, sitting nestled among stacks of the New York Times and intently reading every line of news about politics and economics, has become a sight of wonder for anyone visiting the Sidis' home. You perceive the pungent smell of printing ink. The rustling of newspaper represents the flow of the entire world pouring into your small room. At age 2, you are no longer satisfied with reading. You want to create text. The heavy metal typewriter becomes your favorite toy. You sit in your high chair, your short fingers clattering on the iron keys, producing precise lines of English and French. You do not see it as pressure. It is a liberation. Your inner world begins to take shape through words, where you can organize your complex thoughts into tangible forms. Your father is always by your side, whispering the rules of learning into your ear just before you fall asleep, using psychological techniques so that knowledge permeates your dreams. He instructs your mother, avoid punishment in all ways possible. It is the first cause of fear. Try not to say don't. Instead, explain why what you say is so. Awaken curiosity. It is the key to learning. Never fail to answer, and never put off your child's questions. Never force your child to learn, nor judge his ability to learn by adult standards. Implant ideas at bedtime, just before sleep. Suggestions made then will make a solid impression. Never lie to your child or use evasions. Refrain from showing him off. But alas, Your father is the first to break that final rule, as he begins to invite colleagues and the press to witness the results of the educational method he so fervently pursues. At age 3, you enter the world of ancient languages on your own. Latin, with its rigid grammatical structures like a logical maze, fascinates you. You need no guide. You look at the conjugation tables and find their rules yourself in a single day. You feel a strange connection to the ancients, as if you are hearing the whispers of Roman philosophers in your own room. By age 4, instead of scribbling drawings of houses or the sun, you use the typewriter to write a treatise on anatomy in French. You describe the functioning of the heart, lungs, and nerves with the precision of a real doctor and dedicate this first book to your cousin. Do you ever wonder why your hands held the scalpel of knowledge even before they held a ball? Why was your definition of joy the decoding of the mysteries of the human body instead of running on green grass? Age 5 marks the awakening of a mathematical genius. Numbers begin to dance before your eyes, not as individual entities, but as part of an eternal logical network. You look at history and see it as a sequence of predictable numbers. You construct a complex algorithm in your head that allows you to accurately name any day of the week for any date in the past or future. When your father, who is also very skilled in mathematics, presents a riddle, you answer so quickly that he is stunned. Your intellect has officially surpassed your first teacher. You write more books on grammar and anatomy, turning your desk into a non-stop workshop of knowledge production. In 1904, when you were 6 years old, your parents decided to take you to a public school in Brookline, Massachusetts. You enter the first grade with a book by Shakespeare under your arm. The eyes of the teacher and classmates look at you as if looking at a creature from another planet. While other children are learning to spell the simplest words, you complete the entire 7-year elementary curriculum in less than 7 months. You glide through the classes like the wind, leaving no trace of a normal childhood. You master algebra, geometry, and begin learning Russian, German, Hebrew, Turkish, and Armenian. Each language opens a new worldview for you, but simultaneously pushes you further from the world of your peers. You can speak to scholars in 8 languages, but you do not know how to start a conversation with a child playing hopscotch in the schoolyard. At age 7, the peak of your linguistic creativity explodes when you decide that existing languages are not perfect enough. You begin to construct a language of your own, a private world that only you fully understand. Vendergood. You sit in the corner of the room, writing the Book of Vendergood, meticulously building a grammatical structure based on Latin and Greek, but possessing the absolute logic of mathematics. You divide Vendergood into 8 grammatical moods, including one you call strongible, indicative, potential, imperative, absolute, subjunctive, imperative, infinitive, optative, and Sidis's own strongible. You abandon the common base, 1-0 system to use base, 1-2, believing it offers higher flexibility in calculation. The sounds of Vendergood resonate in your head like music. Ease, 1. Duet, 2. Tree, 3. Guar, 4. Quin, 5. Sex, 6. Sep, 7. U, 8. Non, 9. Essem, 10. Elevenos, 11. Dec, 12. You write example sentences to test its operation. The toxotes obscurit. Unidisceo Vendergood. Perhaps Vendergood is the final fortress to protect your ego, a place where no one, not even your parents, can fully invade and mold. When you turn 8, Your curiosity reaches the highest thresholds of academia. You not only write 4 more books and develop a table of base, 1-2 logarithms, but also take the anatomy exam of Harvard Medical School, where your mother once dreamed of, and pass it with ease. You also conquered the entrance exam of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. The name of the Sidis prodigy begins to appear frequently in newspapers. People call you the smartest person in the world, a wonder of the century. But amidst the camera flashes and the praise, do you ever feel the coldness of isolation? You stand there, an 8-year-old child with the intellect of a philosopher, but your shoulders are not yet wide enough to bear the weight of an entire rigorous education. You see other children playing in the sunlight, their laughter clear and carefree, while you are absorbed in logarithmic numbers and complex grammatical structures. Are you truly happy in your kingdom of intellect? Or are you just a voluntary prisoner in your father's psychological laboratory? The contrast between your tiny hands and the thick books on spatial geometry is a beautiful yet haunting image, a sign that your development has fallen out of rhythm with the laws of nature. You feel a powerful urge to go further, beyond the narrow limits of your home and the local school. The words of Vendergood are still dancing on the page, but your mind is turned toward the ancient lecture halls in Cambridge, where the greatest minds await. The winds from the Atlantic blow through New York, carrying the scent of change and the new challenges that lie ahead. You pack your old wooden alphabet blocks into a wooden box, feeling your hands have grown a bit larger, but your soul still carries the weight of unanswered questions. You step out of the room that has been your companion for 8 years. Your father's typewriter still clatters steadily behind you like a persistent drumbeat, guiding you toward the pier, where the journey to Boston awaits in the misty fog of early morning. Part 2. Rejected by Harvard and temporary studies at Tufts. You step off the steam train, feeling the biting cold of the Massachusetts winter seeping through the thick wool coat your mother carefully dressed you in. The pungent smell of coal and the shrieking train whistle echo in the misty early morning of Cambridge. You stand there, a 9-year-old boy of small stature, but within your head, an entire universe of knowledge operates at the speed of light. In the year 1907, you are no longer the child playing with wooden blocks in a room in New York. You have completed the entire high school curriculum in a mere 6 weeks, a feat that would make even the most mature minds bow in respect. You look down at your hands, still stained with a bit of purple ink from the manuscript pages of the Vendergood language, and wonder if the red brick gates of Harvard University ahead truly stand open to welcome a soul carrying the intellect of a meteor like yours. Around you, the academic atmosphere of Cambridge envelops every corner, yet you feel like a stranger at a banquet of giants. Your father, Boris Sidis, walks beside you with long, determined strides, his breath forming white plumes of mist in the cold air. He is not just your father. He is the architect, directing every heartbeat of your life. He carries a thick portfolio containing evidence of your genius, the 8 languages you have mastered, the outstanding anatomy exams at Harvard Medical School, and the mathematical works you wrote while other children were still learning to count. Your father believes you are ready, and more importantly, he believes the world is ready to admire the most perfect product of his educational philosophy. He looks directly at the Harvard gates, believing in the conventional thinking that held humanity back. You stand before the admissions board of the most prestigious school in America, feeling the eyes of the old, stern professors piercing through you from behind their round-rimmed glasses. You answer questions about advanced mathematics, philosophy, and languages with a strange composure. Your voice still carries a childish tone, but its content holds the weight of centuries of knowledge. The professors admit that you are intellectually capable of university-level work. But then, a long silence fills the room. You see hesitation in their eyes, a hesitation born not of intellect, but of fear towards something that exceeds the laws of nature. They see in you a transcendent mind, but also a soul, too young socially and emotionally for university life. Harvard's rejection falls like a bucket of cold water on the fire of your father's ambition. You stand there, silently watching your father explode in uncontrollable rage. To Boris Sidis, Harvard's request for you to be waiting until he was older and more mature was not protection, but an insult to the scientific truth he so fervently pursued. You feel the heat of your father's anger and the coldness of society's refusal. Could they be right? You can solve complex differential equations, but do you know how to cope with the loneliness of sitting in a lecture hall filled with young adults a decade older than you? You can construct a new language, but do you have a language to speak to your own heart when it feels lost? This event did not stop behind the closed doors of the admissions office. Your father turned this rejection into a massive media campaign. You find yourself on the front page of the New York Times, with headlines calling you the boy genius, rejected by Harvard. Camera flashes burst continuously whenever you step out, and reporters surround you to ask things a 9-year-old should not have to worry about. You become a phenomenon, a strange creature in a glass cage for the whole world to scrutinize. A bitter paradox unfolds. While your father fights for you to be treated like a mature scholar, his very actions turn you into a display item for the curiosity of the masses. You are no longer William. You are Sidis, the prodigy. The anonymity you crave, the simple peace of being immersed in numbers, is stripped away from this moment on. To fill the waiting period, you are taken to Tufts University. This is a temporary stop, a buffer zone between the childhood world you left behind and the academic world you are not yet officially permitted to enter. At Tufts, you are not enrolled as a student, but you are allowed to wander freely through the ancient corridors and attend lectures by brilliant mathematics professors. You enter vast libraries where the scent of old paper and leather book bindings creates an atmosphere so quiet you can hear your own thoughts. You no longer have to learn basic knowledge. You begin to interact with knowledge as a peer to the masters. At Tufts, you spend hours scrutinizing mathematics textbooks. With keen eyes and a seamless logical mind, you begin to find cracks in works considered standards. You point out logical inconsistencies in equations that have been in print for decades. You use your small pencil to correct the mistakes of your predecessors, feeling as though you are clearing an abandoned intellectual garden. There is a private joy in finding truth amidst error, but behind that joy is a haunting rhetorical question. If even the greatest minds can be wrong about numbers, how can you be sure your parents are right as they program your life? The peak of your time at Tufts is when you lay hands on Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. Remember, in 1907, the scientific world was still reeling and struggling to understand what that man with the messy hair had just published. But to you, Einstein's equations are not a maze, but a rhythmic piece of music. You study space, time, and the curvature of reality. While you yourself are experiencing a curvature of human existence, You spend nights searching for holes in Einstein's calculations, striving to decode the secrets of the universe, which most physicists were still struggling to understand. The contrast here is heartbreaking. A child not old enough to buy a piece of candy alone is challenging the foundations of modern physics. You can understand time dilation at the speed of light, but you feel the time of your childhood painfully contracting. You can calculate the mass of stars, but you cannot measure the weight of expectations pressing down on your thin shoulders. Why does society praise your understanding of the universe, but fear your desire to play a normal game? Is superhuman intellect a gift, or is it actually a lonely sentence you must serve amidst the admiration of others? Your parents, Boris and Sarah, see what you do at Tufts and believe even more in their theory. They view your correction of Einstein or finding errors in textbooks as powerful evidence to go back and knock on Harvard's door. They do not see the times you sit quietly in a library corner, looking out the window, watching other students laughing on the grass. They do not hear your sigh when you see a leather ball roll past your feet, and you do not know what to do with it. They ignored your need for connection in exchange for a perfect intellectual growth chart in the newspapers. Your development was not a flower blooming naturally in the sun, but a laboratory organism forced to grow faster than all biological laws. The gap between your mind and your heart becomes as vast as an abyss. You learn to hide your immature emotions behind complex algorithms. You begin to realize that the world only loves the genius part of you, while the human part, a small William needing comfort, seems like a burden, a flaw to be covered up. You become more withdrawn, finding solace in the pages of books and numbers, where the rules are always consistent and never betray you. Vendergood, your own language, is now no longer just a linguistic exercise. It has become a shelter where you can escape the reporter's lenses and the judgments of the admissions board. Finally, in 1909, when you had just turned 11, the pressure from your undeniable achievements at Tufts and your father's relentless campaigning yielded results. Harvard ran out of excuses to keep him out. You have won. You have officially become the youngest student in the history of this school. But is it truly a victory? Or is it the beginning of a series of challenges even harsher than the most difficult physics equations? You stand before the mirror, straightening your bow tie, preparing for your first day of school. The face in the mirror is still that of a boy with chubby cheeks, but the eyes carry a mature sadness. You do not hear the birds singing outside the window. You only hear the steady turning of pages and your father's whispers of the glories ahead. You step out of the house, your shiny black leather shoes tapping on the cobblestone sidewalk of Cambridge. You do not look back, where memories of a childhood that never existed are slowly vanishing into the mist of the past. The shadows of the late afternoon begin to stretch across the red brick walls of Harvard Yard as you head toward the school gate. A church bell rings from afar, somber and solemn, signaling a new beginning. You take a deep breath, sensing the aroma of old books and oak from the ancient lecture halls spreading through the air. You step across the threshold of greatness, your feet touching the stones worn down by the footsteps of generations of scholars, feeling the vibration of history flowing through your small feet as you go deep inside the dim hallways of knowledge. Part 3. Entering Harvard and the Historic Mathematics Lecture. You step through the heavy iron gates of Harvard Yard on a September morning in 1909, feeling the autumn chill of New England seep through your coat. The stones beneath your feet have been worn smooth by the footsteps of centuries of great men. But today, they seem to vibrate in the presence of a being as small as you. You are only 11 years old. 2 years ago, when you were 9, these gates slammed shut in your father's face with the judgment that you were too immature emotionally for college life. But now, after long nights of diligent work at Tufts, after the pressure of newspaper articles and your father's extreme persistence, this ancient academic institution has had to yield. You are officially a special student, a title that is both a glory and a label that separates you from the rest of the world. You are not just a student, you are a living record, the person who shattered a milestone held since 1674 to become the youngest person ever to enroll at Harvard. As you enter the lecture hall, you find yourself dwarfed by young men of 18 or 19 with broad shoulders and deep voices. You realize you are standing in a legendary class, home to minds like Norbert Wiener or Roger Sessions. But even among those prodigies, everyone's eyes still fixate on you as the most extraordinary creature. You perceive the scent of old books, the polished oak of the desks, and the smell of tobacco from the professor's pipes, all creating an atmosphere of solemnity that is suffocating. Your parents, wanting to protect you from social friction, decided to have you live at home instead of in a dormitory. Each day, you glide through the campus like a ghost passing through campus, coming and going in silence, without a single friend to share passing thoughts, without a single club opening its doors to welcome an 1-year-old. Your intellect is soaring in the clouds of mathematical theory, but your feet are lost on the ground of social reality. The rupture between your genius intellect and your childlike form is evident in every gesture. You stand there, small, with a high-pitched voice that hasn't yet broken, always carrying an air of shyness and clumsiness. Older classmates look at you with curiosity mixed with ridicule. You recall Buckminster Fuller's descriptions of you, how you still wore the clothes of a 1-2-year-old, even as your age approached late adolescence. While other male students wore long trousers and adult leather shoes, Willie Sidis still wore Little Lord Fauntleroy short pants and high-button shoes. To your parents, it was protection. But to you, it was an invisible cage that made you a target for cruel teasing. You keep your head down when walking through hallways, trying to make yourself as small as possible to avoid the giggles and mockery about your voice or appearance. There were even older female students who pretended to flirt with you just to see the naive reaction of a genius who had never known the taste of love, turning your budding emotions into a joke for the entire school. But when you step into the world of numbers, you are no longer a pitiful child. On the night of the 5th of January, 1910, an event occurred that forever changed the way the world viewed you. You were invited to lecture before the Harvard Mathematical Club. The meeting room was packed, the warmth from the breath of hundreds of people blurring the glass window panes in the January cold. About 100 leading professors, the most outstanding mathematics, students, and reporters with notebooks in hand waited with bated breath. You step up to the podium, your velvet knickers looking out of place among the formal suits of the scholars. You feel your throat dry, and a few giggles of nervous tension escape your lips. But as soon as the chalk touches the blackboard, a miraculous transformation occurs. Your mind expands into the fourth dimension, where shapes are no longer limited by the narrow three-dimensional reality. You begin to speak about four-dimensional bodies with a confidence and coherence that stuns the entire hall. The initially high-pitched voice gradually becomes sharp and filled with the power of knowledge. You draw hypercubes, explaining non-Euclidean geometry, as if you were describing a familiar garden. You lead the greatest minds of the era through the paths of abstract thought where space and time entwine. Old professors, who had spent their entire lives studying mathematics, suddenly found themselves like children learning their ABCs before an 1-year-old boy. You were not just presenting knowledge, you were performing a symphony of logic. When a professor tried to interrupt to clarify a point, you responded with a directness that was almost cruel. "I cannot see that you have added anything to the discussion." Those words echoed in the quiet room, asserting the truth that in the kingdom of intellect, age has no meaning. After the lecture, the whole world seemed to explode around you. Professor Daniel F. Comstock from MIT looked into your eyes and made a historic prediction. "I believe he will be a great mathematician, the leader in that science in the future." Norbert Wiener, who witnessed that night firsthand, also had to admit that the talk would have done credit to a first or second-year graduate student of any age. You became the focus of national media. The name William James Sidis appeared on the front page of every newspaper from Boston to California. Your father, Boris, smiled triumphantly, regarding this as ironclad proof of his educational theory. But you, amidst the swarm of admiration and prophecies, felt a weariness seeping deep into your bones. This fame did not bring you freedom. Instead, it felt like a rope tightening slowly. You began to realize that you were being observed, like a specimen under a microscope. Every step you took at Harvard Yard could become a news snippet. You were no longer allowed to be a child, nor were you allowed to be an ordinary scholar. You bore the expectations of an entire scientific field on your shoulders, and more importantly, the expectations of a father who always saw you as a successful project. Rhetorical questions began to appear in your mind every night before sleep. Why did they need you to become a great man? What would happen if you just wanted to vanish into the crowd, to wear normal long trousers and walk around without anyone recognizing you? Your transcendent intellect had brought you to the peak of the world, but there, the air was thin and the cold was numbing. You stand by the window of the Harvard Library, looking down at the people hurrying by under the dim streetlights. You feel as if you are standing in a true fourth dimension, where you can observe everything, but no one can touch you, and you cannot touch anyone. The formulas for hypercubes remain imprinted in your mind, but they cannot explain the loneliness growing larger in your chest. You realize you have reached a peak that others take a lifetime to achieve, but the price paid is the loss of yourself before you even had the chance to grow up. A sense of unease begins to sprout, a silent crack in the soul that no mathematical equation can mend. The night wind drifts through the window slit, carrying the scent of dry leaves and the moisture of the Charles River. You pack away your manuscripts, feeling the weight of the papers in your hand like the weight of a pressing destiny. You step out of the library, your lonely footsteps echoing on the cold stone hallways. The light from the street lamps casts your shadow long and dark on the ground, a thin and solitary shadow. You walk toward the darkness of the trees, where the mist begins to descend over the campus, blurring the ancient red brick buildings. You feel an urge to escape, to move away from the scrutinizing eyes and the praise that is slowly becoming shackles. Your feet step faster on the paths covered with fallen leaves, leading you deep into the silent night, where only the sound of a racing heart and the feeling of confusion about a fracturing future remain. Part 4. Mental Crisis and Harvard Graduation. You walk along the paved paths of Harvard Yard, feeling the chill of the early mist seeping through your wool coat. The ancient red brick buildings surround you like silent witnesses to history, but in your eyes, they gradually become the walls of an intellectual prison. Harvard University in the early 20th century was not a place for an 11-year-old child. This was the kingdom of young men aged 18 and 19, who were eagerly stepping onto the threshold of adulthood with desires for love, politics, and late-night revelry. You hear laughter echoing from the dormitories, heated philosophical debates over illicit drinks, and the rhythmic marching of reserve units. But you stand outside of all that. The social structure of Harvard, which valued interaction and character building through clubs, was a maze for which you had no map to escape. Those activities were considered by the school to be as important as academic knowledge, but to you, they were only painful reminders of the unbridgeable gap between a transcendent intellect and a tiny physical form. Every afternoon, when the school bell rang to signal the end of classes, you quietly packed your books and stepped out of the gate to return home. Your parents, wishing to protect their intellectual treasure from the complexities of dormitory life, unintentionally severed the most natural link between students. You did not have those all-nighters with friends to solve a difficult math problem or share the inner feelings of adolescence. You were like a ghost passing through campus, present in classrooms as a pure mathematical entity, but disappearing entirely from the spiritual life of the community. The age gap was not just numbers, it was an abyss of lived experience. Your classmates were seasoned veterans or vibrant young men, while you still bore the appearance of a small child with a high-pitched voice that had not yet broken. Whenever you were stressed, involuntary giggles would escape, making the eyes around you even more wary and distant. That isolation did not stop at being ignored. You felt the cold air of ridicule surrounding you at every step. Buckminster Fuller, who would later become a great architect, saw you at 16 and later exclaimed that most students considered him a freak. Your image in their eyes was a laughable paradox. According to the unwritten rules of the era, a 14-year-old boy already had to wear long trousers to assert maturity, but you were still forced by your parents to wear the clothes of a 10-year-old. The Willie Sidis still wore Little Lord Fauntleroy short pants and high-button shoes became a symbol of the deprivation of childhood. You stood at the podium to solve four-dimensional space equations that amazed even professors. But when you stepped down, you were a child trapped in the clothes of a bygone era. Why could they admire your brain, but mock your person? Did you ever wonder if genius was worth exchanging for daily humiliation regarding your appearance and demeanor? Your brilliance in the classroom became a double-edged sword. The deeper you understood mathematics and philosophy, the further you were pushed from human relationships. When class ended, you often retreated to the back row, lowering your head to avoid scrutinizing glares. Some students chose silence, but others turned their hostility into cruel actions. They hid your books, gave you misinformation about assignments, and whispered harsh words about your childish voice as soon as the professors turned their backs. Most painful were perhaps the sophisticated pranks from the students of Radcliffe. They sent you fake love letters, pretending to flirt, and even proposing marriage. You, an innocent boy with absolute faith in sincerity, could not recognize those emotional traps until you became a laughingstock for the entire school. The humiliation spread like an oil slick, soaking into your already fragile self-esteem. You once had to admit in frustration to those teasing you that he admitted he had never kissed a girl. That sentence was not a mere confession. It was a cry for help from a soul stripped of the most basic human emotions. Later biographers all had to admit a bitter truth. He had been made a laughingstock at Harvard. Meanwhile, in the outside world, the media never stopped hunting the boy genius. Newspapers were full of praise for your transcendent brain, but absolutely not a single line mentioned the loneliness and silent tears in the dim corridors of Harvard. You felt like a strange creature in a giant circus, where the crowd only waited for you to perform intellectual acrobatics to applaud, and then were ready to throw stones of mockery when you left the spotlight. The pressure to be perfect, to always lead, and to prove your father's theory became a stone weight pressing on your chest. You did not have the social tools to defend yourself. You did not know how to use humor to diffuse sarcasm, nor did you have the strength of character to command respect. You only had numbers and theorems, but they could not protect you from the cruelty of the masses. In 1911, when you had just turned 13, the overstretched string finally snapped. The accumulated pressure from intense study, cruel bullying, and public scrutiny caused you to collapse completely. You experienced a severe nervous breakdown, a spiritual darkness that no mathematical formula could decode. Details of this crisis were kept by the family as a dark secret, but the world noticed your absence from Harvard classes. Your father, Boris Sidis, took you to his Institute of Psychopathology in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. There, instead of playing like a child, you continued to be a research subject for your own father. Under strict supervision, you had to undergo rest therapies, isolation, and possibly hypnosis to fix the damaged brain. You lay in a stark white room, listening to the Portsmouth sea wind howling outside, and wondered if you were a human being or just a broken machine in need of maintenance. The tabloid press did not miss this opportunity to tear your life apart. They spread malicious rumors that the young genius was thought to be a subject to fits of insanity and recurrent nervous breakdown. The public began to doubt your father's forced educational methods, but they looked at you not with sympathy, but with a curiosity mixed with dread, as if looking at a scientific experiment gone wrong. Your family viewed this crisis as only a temporary setback, a small obstacle on the road to glory. They did not realize that deep inside, the William of old had partially died. Faith in the world and the thirst for pure knowledge had been replaced by a vague fear of crowds and a burning desire to escape. After several months of treatment in New Hampshire, you returned to Harvard in 1912. You entered the lecture hall with a different mindset, colder, more distant, and more cautious. Your intellect remained as sharp as ever. You still mastered the most difficult subjects, from advanced calculus to epistemology and metaphysics. However, your transcript began to show B's and C's, mixed with A's. That was not a sign of intellectual decline, but an expression of silent resistance. You began to feel bored with mechanical academic requirements. You spent most of your free time in the library, burying yourself in independent research that no one knew about, avoiding classes where you felt there was nothing left to learn. You wrote your graduation thesis on mathematical philosophy, a profound work exploring the connection between numbers and the nature of reality. Professor Daniel Comstock once again made great prophecies about your future as I predict that young Sidis will be a great astronomical mathematician, the leader in that science in the future. But those praises were now only hollow echoes to you. On the 18th of June, 1914, at the age of 16, you stood on the podium of glory to receive your Bachelor of Arts degree with honors from Harvard University. You were the youngest person in history to achieve this. Thundering applause filled the hall, but you felt only an ultimate emptiness. To your parents, this was a day of triumph. To the press, it was a sensational story. But to you, it was the day a sentence ended. When reporters surrounded you with questions about the future, about great inventions or prestigious awards, you looked straight at them and issued a shocking manifesto. I want to live the perfect life. The only way to live the perfect life is to live it in seclusion. I have always hated crowds. That declaration was not the impulse of a rebellious teenager. It was the result of years of being imprisoned in expectations and ridicule. You publicly vowed to remain celibate, never to marry, as a way to protect yourself from malicious pranks like those at Radcliffe, and to ensure that no other generation would have to endure the molding you had. You even had a small medal made to commemorate this vow, a symbol of freedom in solitude. You had fulfilled your duty to your parents, to Harvard, and to society. Now, you only wanted to vanish. You wanted to find a place where no one knew who William James Sidis was, where numbers were no longer a burden. And anonymity was the most precious gift. You stepped down from the podium, feeling the weight of the parchment degree in your hand. But your mind had already flown to nameless lands. You walked past the whispering rows of spectators, not once turning back to look at the red brick buildings that had witnessed the collapse of your childhood. The harsh summer sun shone down on Harvard Yard, making the shadows of the trees pitch black and sharp on the ground. You left the ceremony while the crowd was still busy celebrating, your feet walking fast toward the train station with a strange sense of liberation. The train whistle shrieked in the air, carrying the heat of summer and the call of new horizons. You stepped onto the train car, chose a seat hidden in a dark corner, looking through the window as the familiar sights of Cambridge began to recede, giving way to the vast green fields stretching south, where a new chapter, uncertain yet free, awaited you in Texas. Part 5. Teaching at Rice and studying at Harvard Law School. You step off the train at Houston Station, feeling the sweltering, thick heat of South Texas blow directly into your face. The smell of kerosene, road dust, and moisture from the Gulf of Mexico creates an atmosphere entirely different from the elegant, somber grace of Cambridge you just left behind. This is September 1915. At age 17, the age when other teenagers are still grappling with their first romantic stirrings, you already carry a Harvard degree with honors and a fame so resounding it has become a sentence. You recall the words you spoke to the press on graduation day, a desperate monologue they dismissed as the eccentricity of a genius. I want to live the perfect life. The only way to live the perfect life is to live it in seclusion. But such seclusion seems to be a luxury that fate has not yet allowed you to touch. You have come to Texas not to hide, but to assume the position of assistant in mathematics at the Rice Institute, a new beginning you hope will help you escape the scrutiny of Northern public opinion. At the Rice Institute, you become one of the youngest university instructors in American history. You stand at the podium, facing students, most of whom are older than you, taller than you, and bear the ruggedness of the sun-drenched West. You are tasked with 3 courses: Euclidean geometry, non-Euclidean geometry, and trigonometry for freshmen. Your intellect remains a relentless waterfall. Instead of using old textbooks, you personally compile a textbook on Euclidean geometry written entirely in ancient Greek. You are fascinated by pure logical structures, the lines and angles where truth is eternal and untainted by complex human emotions. That book is a masterpiece of intellect, a fusion of ancient language and modern mathematics. But it is also a symbol of your ultimate loneliness. You are speaking a language that no one around you can understand, both literally and figuratively. The hours in class become a form of mental torture for you. Your voice, still carrying the high-pitched echoes of puberty, is lost amidst the large room. You present concepts of non-Euclidean space, of the curvature of mathematical reality, with pure passion. But the response is only bewildered stares and the secret laughter of students. They see in you a professor boy, an awkward, strange creature thrown into the middle of a world of real men. Pranks begin to emerge, mocking notes pinned to your back, difficult questions posed not to gain knowledge but to test your embarrassment. You do not know how to use authority to suppress, nor humor to appease the crowd. You stand there, small before a blackboard filled with formulas, feeling like a prophet talking about the stars to people who only care about the ground beneath their feet. Disappointment invades your soul as you realize that even among colleagues, you find no resonance. Other instructors in the mathematics department look at you with respect for your intellect but social distance. You are too smart for them to converse with as equals, yet too awkward for them to consider a soulmate. You often sit alone in your office, surrounded by Greek manuscripts and unfinished calculations, listening to the laughter echoing from the hallway, knowing you will never belong there. The isolation in Texas is more terrifying than in Harvard, for here you have no family, no familiar library corners to hide in. Texas is an intellectual desert for your soul, which yearns for a genuine connection. Finally, after 8 months of struggling, the fragile link with the Rice Institute snaps. In mid-1916, you decide to leave the podium, leave Houston, and return to New England. You offer reasons regarding boredom with the specialized department and the pressure of teaching, but deep down, you know it is a painful failure. Years later, reflecting on this time, you remarked bitterly, "I never knew why they gave me the job in the first place. I'm not much of a teacher." I didn't leave. I was asked to go. That sentence carries the weight of a person who has realized that transcendent intellect cannot substitute for human understanding. You realize you are a great scholar, but a poor professor, and this world seemingly has no place for those who only know how to think, but not how to express themselves in the way of the masses. Returning to Cambridge in September 1916, you decide to take an unexpected turn, enrolling in Harvard Law School. At age 18, you are no longer the child in short pants of years past. Your body has grown taller, your face bears the lines of an adult, but your eyes remain filled with melancholy and displacement. You abandon the pure numbers of mathematics to seek the dry words of the law. You are fascinated by constitutional law and legal philosophy, believing that law is humanity's effort to create order in a chaotic world. You study with incredible intensity, always maintaining the top position in your class, as if conquering a new field is the only way you feel you still exist. But law is not like mathematics. It is full of emotional loopholes and political schemes that your logical mind cannot foresee. The environment at Harvard Law School, once again becomes a battlefield for your soul. Law students, with their sharpness and ambition, view you as a perfect target for malicious pranks. They do not mock your intellect, for they know they cannot compare. They attack your weakest point, your emotional innocence. You recall the love letters sent to you, the sweet flirtations from Radcliffe girls. You, a genius who could decode the mysteries of the universe, were completely blind to the deceptive games of humans. You once believed it was true affection. You once showed those letters to classmates with an awkward pride, only to receive boisterous laughter and ultimate humiliation when the truth was exposed. It was not love. It was a cruel experiment on a heart that had never been taught how to love. To protect yourself from such wounds, you erected a fortified wall with dogmatic vows. You publicly declared that you would live a celibate life forever, that women held absolutely no attraction for you. You established a personal constitution for yourself, minting a small medal to commemorate the vow to never marry. You always carried with you a painting of an ancient tree, where you had stood in its shadow to vow to yourself that you would never let anyone into your private world again. Celibacy for you was not a sacrifice, but a salvation, a way for you to keep the last piece of your soul from being torn apart by the outside world. You chose to make friends with pages of law and abstract ideals, where there is no betrayal and no mocking laughter. But the world around you is shifting violently, and the walls of Harvard Law School cannot block the sound of gunfire echoing from Europe. In 1917, when the U.S. officially entered World War I, the atmosphere in Cambridge changed completely. Extreme nationalism and militarism spread like an epidemic. You see your classmates eagerly heading to the front, and hear songs praising war echoing through the streets. In your mind, as someone who always worshipped logic and humanity, war is a collective madness, a failure of human intellect. You begin to feel disgusted with the legal system you are studying, seeing it used to justify killing and coercion. The socialist and pacifist ideas your father taught you from childhood now burn brightly in your heart. You begin to get more deeply involved in anti-war political movements. You participate in protests of the intellectual working class in Boston, standing in the same ranks as those society considers enemies of the state. You publicly oppose the draft, considering it a form of human enslavement. Your intellect now no longer serves mathematical theorems or dry laws, but serves an ideal of a fairer and more peaceful world. You realize that sitting in a library researching constitutional law is meaningless when the most basic freedoms are being trampled under military boots. This political awakening brings you a new purpose in life, but it also pushes you onto a path full of danger and absolute isolation from the upper class to which you originally belonged. By early 1919, your boredom with academia reached its peak. You look at the law textbooks on your desk and see only the shackles of thought. You are only a few short months away from graduation, but you decide you can no longer continue acting in a system you no longer believe in. In March 1919, you clear out your room, leaving behind dust-covered law books, and walk out of Harvard Law School without caring for the degree. This is your permanent break from the path of formal academia. You are no longer a prodigy being molded to become a great man. You are a free man, but carrying the scars of expectation. You step out onto the streets of Boston, where the spring chill still lingers, feeling the heat of upcoming protests spreading through the air. The drums of the marching military in the distance sound steadily, blending with the cheers of the crowd rooting for the war. You walk against the flow of people, your shoulders slightly hunched from the weight of your thoughts, but your feet stepping with determination. The sunset stretches long over the old brick walls of Boston, creating somber shadows that cover your path. You do not look back at the magnificent university buildings behind you, which were once home, but also your prison. You turn into a dim, small alleyway where the smell of mold and city trash begins to grow more pungent. Your footsteps tap on the cold asphalt road, leading you toward the slums where groups of workers are secretly gathering for the upcoming May Day. Night falls, blurring the face of a genius who has just decided to abandon the kingdom of knowledge to plunge into the storms of social reality, where red flags are beginning to fly in the cold wind. Part 6. Participation in social movements and arrest. You turn into a dim, small alleyway where the smell of mold and city trash begins to grow more pungent. The rhythmic tap of your footsteps on the cold asphalt road leads you toward the slums where groups of workers are secretly gathering. In March 1919, Boston is no longer a city of scholars in your eyes, but a battlefield of opposing ideologies. You have left Harvard Law School, leaving behind the dry legal textbooks you once hoped would bring order to your life. You realize that the law in the hands of the powerful is merely a rope to tighten the shackles on the necks of laborers. Influenced by your parents' socialist beliefs and a deep compassion for the devastation of World War I, you find you no longer belong in the brightly lit lecture halls. You publicly declare yourself a conscientious objector, a courageous yet dangerous act amidst the rising tide of extreme nationalism. The atmosphere of the first Red Scare envelops America like a thick black cloud, where anyone with progressive ideas is considered an enemy of the state. You immerse yourself in the writings of Marx, finding in them a new logic, not the logic of mindless numbers, but the logic of social justice. You begin to support a Soviet form of government, where those who create wealth for society hold control over their own destiny. You clearly distinguish between political socialists and Bolsheviks. This awakening is not an impulse. It is the result of a genius mind trying to solve the heartbreaking problem of human suffering. You are no longer a mathematical prodigy locked in a glass cage. You have become a social activist, ready to take to the streets to defend the voiceless. The morning of the 1st of May, 1919, is a brilliant spring day but carries the heated breath of rebellion. You stand amidst the crowd at the Dudley Street Opera House, feeling the pulse of thousands of hearts simmering with discontent. The smell of sweat, coarse fabric, and whispering murmurs creates a high-pressure background score. When the parade begins to move toward the new International Hall, you do not choose to hide. At 21, with a thin frame but a determined gaze, you appear in the most prominent position, holding high a bright red flag. In the eyes of the police and conservative bystanders, that flag is a symbol of rebellion and terrifying communism. But in your heart, that crimson color is not a threat. It is a symbol for the common blood of humanity. You believe that beneath the layers of nationality, class, and status, we all share the same blood, all yearning for a life of sufficiency and freedom. The unlicensed parade becomes a set trap. When the Boston police swoop in with batons and shouting, the peaceful atmosphere of Labor Day suddenly shatters into 1,000 pieces. You hear screams and violent scuffles on the paved road. Flags are snatched down, bodies are thrown to the ground. Amidst the chaos, you are seized by the police. They label you a leader, a dangerous Reds plotter trying to overthrow the government. The image of Harvard prodigy arrested in Red Rally immediately appears on the front page of the Boston Herald. The contrast between the mathematical prodigy of years past and the riot ringleader of today becomes ripe fodder for public opinion. They ask, what happened to that great intellect? Could excessive intelligence have led the way to madness? On the 2nd of May, 1919, you stand before the Roxbury Court, facing Judge Albert F. Hayden. The courtroom is cold, with heavy wooden benches and the smell of old files. You are prosecuted on 3 charges: unlawful assembly, rioting, and assaulting a police officer. You are tried under the Sedition Act of 1918, a ruthless legal tool to stifle all dissenting voices. But instead of trembling or pleading for clemency, you stand tall, defending yourself with razor-sharp composure. You bluntly declare that you do not believe in God but put your faith in the theory of evolution. When questioned about the use of violence, you quote the American Declaration of Independence to prove that people have the right to overthrow an oppressive government. Why does society honor the Founding Fathers as revolutionary heroes, but consider you a criminal when you speak of those very ideals? The irony of the legal system is clearer than ever under the light of the truth you are defending. Judge Hayden, representing the old order, could not endure your steadfastness and disregard for authority. He sentences you to 18 months in prison, a harsh sentence aimed at extinguishing the flame of idealism in a 1-year-old. You are sentenced to 6 months for rioting and 12 months for assaulting an officer. You step out of the witness stand with handcuffed hands, but your soul seems freer than ever. You have spoken your truth before power. After posting a massive bail of $5,000 to remain free pending appeal, you walk out of the court amidst a swarm of reporters and hateful glares. But in the darkness of that rejection, you found something that mathematics or law had never brought you: a genuine soul connection. Amidst the closed meetings of the socialist movement, you met Martha Foley. She was an Irish-American activist with dark hair and eyes burning with conviction. To Martha, you were not the Sidis prodigy to be scrutinized, nor a madman to be mocked. She saw you as a normal human being, a comrade sharing noble ideals. Martha's warmth melted the ice covering your heart through all those years of loneliness. You remember the brief moment when the two of you were together, a single kiss given amidst the anxieties of activist life. It was the only true romantic experience, the first and last kiss of your life. Although Martha later did not reciprocate your deep feelings and married someone else, her image became a sanctuary in your mind. You had promised never to marry, but you kept Martha's photograph in your pocket for 25 long years, carrying it through every company, every city, as proof that even a genius has a heart that knows how to ache and how to love. However, the outside world would not leave you at peace with your love or your ideals. The prison sentence caused your father, Boris Sidis, extreme panic. It wasn't that he worried for your freedom, but he feared the educational kingdom he had painstakingly built would collapse. Using power and money, your parents intervened to suspend the prison sentence. But that freedom was only another form of imprisonment, more ruthless and painful. You were forced into a sanatorium managed by your own father in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. To Boris, your political ideas were not ideals, but a mental illness needing treatment. You were locked in a white room where your father used psychological techniques to try to mold your brain once again. They threatened to send you to a real insane asylum if you did not return to the academic path and abandon social activities. The betrayal by your parents was the final knife thrust into your faith. You realized that those who gave you life were your most ruthless jailers. 1 year at the sanatorium and 1 year exiled in California was a period where you were stripped of all basic human rights under the name of family love. You looked out the sanatorium window, seeing the free birds soaring in the Portsmouth sky, and vowed you would never let anyone control your mind again. The relationship between you and your parents was completely shattered, leaving deep psychological scars that no therapeutic method could heal. You learned a bitter lesson. Your genius was a gift to the world, but a curse for yourself, in the hands of those who want to dictate another's life. In 1921, when the period of house arrest ended, you decided to undertake the greatest escape of your life. You left the house in California without a word of goodbye, returning to the East Coast, but not to seek glory. You wanted to die to the name William James Sidis and be reborn in anonymity. You sought out small, dark offices where no one cared about your degrees or IQ. You began doing repetitive manual labor, adding machine operator, typing, or bookkeeping for a meager wage of $23 a week. You felt a strange relief when your hands only had to press soulless number keys without having to think about spatial geometry or social justice. The very sight of a mathematical formula makes me physically ill. All I want to do is run an adding machine, but they won't let me alone. Whenever someone began to suspect your true identity, whenever a colleague recognized the face that once appeared in newspapers, you immediately resigned, changed your alias, and moved to another city. You lived in cheap boarding rooms, surrounded by the streetcar transfers you painstakingly collected, finding joy in the order of traffic routes instead of the chaos of humanity. You chose the path of seclusion to keep the perfection of your soul, just as you vowed at 16. The world might consider you a failure, a forgotten prodigy. But to you, each day spent in silence was a victory over the scrutiny of the masses and the manipulation of your family. You walked through parks in the late afternoon, feeling the freedom of someone with nothing left to lose and nothing left to prove. The city streetlights began to shimmer in the night mist, reflecting on the calm lake surface. You looked down at your shadow in the water, a faint and nameless figure, feeling a peace unknown since leaving the crib in New York. You slipped your hand into your pocket, gently touching the old photo of Martha Foley, feeling the paper worn with time like the memories of a turbulent era. You walk on the sidewalk, your footsteps blending into the hurried pace of the city, sinking into sleep. You no longer head toward university lecture halls or fiery protests, but toward the subway station, where the night trains wait to carry you further into the heart of the darkness of anonymity. The sound of the adding machine still echoes in your mind like a heartbeat of escape, guiding you into a new world where you are no longer a genius, but only a quiet traveler seeking a peaceful harbor for your soul amidst the shifting tides of life. Part 7. Starting Anonymity and Bookkeeping Work. The steady clatter of mechanical calculators echoed in the cramped office space, blending with the pungent smell of printing ink and paper dust dancing under the streaks of afternoon sunlight filtering through a small window. You sat there, among the long wooden rows of desks, in a nameless office in New York, your hands moving across the brass keys with a mechanical yet precise rhythm. This was 1922. You had officially shed the mantle of the smartest person in the world to don the cheap suit of a bookkeeping clerk. After 2 years of being held under the supervision of your parents in New Hampshire and California, you successfully escaped back to the East Coast, not to seek a new intellectual peak, but to embark on a voluntary journey of exile into the heart of the crowd. You no longer wanted to be the William James Sidis of Harvard. You only wanted to be an invisible speck of dust amidst the bustling flow of life. Someone who, when passing on the street, no one would bother to look back at. Your determination was so great that it became a form of cruelty toward yourself. You proactively abandoned every privilege, every old relationship, and every expectation that society had placed on your thin shoulders since you were in the cradle. You realized that to protect the remaining fragment of your soul, after your father's psychological experiments, you had to kill the name Sidis in the public imagination. You began a life of urban nomadism, moving from one boarding room to another, from one city to another, as soon as you felt the breath of fame closing in. For someone who once stood before hundreds of professors to lecture on four-dimensional space, the choice to now stand before simple rows of addition and subtraction was a shocking one. But to you, it was the final fortress, protecting your peace. You yearned for a perfect life, and in your definition, the only way to live the perfect life is to live it in seclusion. The obsession with the past caused a deep psychological aversion to mathematics, the field that was once the family's pride, but was now a symbol of a stolen childhood. You felt a tangible disgust in your chest whenever you accidentally saw a complex equation in a newspaper or an old book. Mathematics to you was no longer the beauty of pure logic, but the clicking of reporters' cameras, the mocking smiles of Harvard classmates, and the cold gaze of your father when you did not achieve absolute perfection. You once confessed in a weary tone, "The very sight of a mathematical formula makes me physically ill. All I want to do is run an adding machine, but they won't let me alone." You chose the adding machine because it only required mechanical operations, demanding no creative thinking, no intellectual sublimation. It allowed your great brain to rest in safe tedium. Starting from 1922, you wandered through the neighborhoods of Boston and New York, accepting jobs that anyone with a tenth of your intellect would find humiliating. You worked as an adding machine operator, a bookkeeping clerk, or a technical draftsman with a strange diligence. You intentionally chose small companies and secluded offices where no one knew the name Sidis. The peak of this hiding was in 1924, when a reporter, after much effort, discovered you working as a clerk in a Wall Street office. You stood there, amidst thick files, receiving a salary of only $23 per week, a figure just enough to pay for meager meals and a narrow boarding room. With an IQ estimated at 250 or 300, that amount was a terrible waste to the world. But to you, it was a fair price to buy freedom. You looked straight at the reporter and asserted that all you wanted was anonymity, enough money to get by on, and a job that made no demands on him. However, genius is a light that cannot be completely hidden under a mundane shell. Although you tried to turn off your brain, that extraordinary ability revealed itself unconsciously in daily tasks. Your colleagues at the Wall Street office were often stunned to see you operate a comptometer, while other employees had to concentrate intensely on data entry. You performed it as an instinct with terrifying speed. You could operate two machines at once, your left hand typing on one, your right hand entering data on the other, using your elbows to hit the spacebar rhythmically like a dancer performing skillful moves. An accounting workload that would take an average person 8 hours to complete, you finished in less than an hour, neatly and with absolute accuracy. For the remaining 7 hours, you sat quietly, eyes staring into the distance, letting your mind drift into spaces no one could touch, pretending to be just a tired gear in a giant office machine. To maintain this seclusion, you became a master of the art of disguise. You used a series of different aliases to sign employment contracts or short articles in obscure journals. Sometimes you were Frank Falupa, other times John W. Shattuck, Parker Green, or Jacob Marmer. You changed your names like changing a coat to avoid the cold of scrutiny. But a cruel loop began to form and haunt you throughout 1922, 1924. Every time you had just settled for a few months, your accidental brilliance, or some ironic coincidence, would expose your true identity. A curious manager seeing you solve a complex statistical problem with just a few pencil strokes, or an old colleague recognizing the face of the former prodigy in old newspapers. Immediately, the feeling of being hunted like a cornered animal resurfaced. You did not explain, did not argue. You packed your few clothes into an old suitcase, resigned the same day, and vanished into the night, leaving behind whispers about a genius freak. Yet, while your body was fleeing on streetcars across the city, your intellect never truly stopped soaring. The media at the time made a cruel mistake in asserting that Sidis's brain had burned out. They did not know that behind the appearance of a somber clerk, you were living an intense underground intellectual life. You spent hours after work wandering through piers and streetcar stations, meticulously collecting thousands of streetcar transfers. You called yourself a peridromophile, a lover of transport routes. Those scraps of paper, trash in the eyes of others, were precious data on urban planning and economic models to your mathematical mind. You analyzed the connectivity of routes, optimized intersections, and turned this quirky hobby into a pioneering work on urban informatics. You wrote a thick book on this subject under the name Frank Falupa, not to seek fame, but to satisfy the need for order in a world you felt was far too chaotic. Inside quiet boarding rooms, under the dim light of oil lamps, you began to sketch the boldest cosmological theories of the era. The period of 1922 1924 was when you nurtured the manuscript for the animate and the inanimate. While the world was still struggling with basic physics concepts, you foresaw the existence of black holes and questioned the reversibility of the second law of thermodynamics. You pondered the increase of entropy in the universe, expressed through the formula $S equals K, ln omega $, and wondered if there was a region of space where life and death, order and chaos, could swap places. Your intellect still burned like a supernova, but you chose to shroud it in a thick black cloud of anonymity. You were contributing to science in the shadows, a most pure contribution because it cared nothing for human recognition. However, the greatest heartache in this period did not come from the pursuit of the press, but from the complete rupture with your family. Since 1922, at the age of 24, you adamantly cut all contact with Dr. Boris and Dr. Sarah Sidis. To you, they were no longer parents, but individuals who had performed a devastating psychological surgery on your childhood. Your acceptance of manual labor for a meager wage was a silent declaration of war, a most powerful resistance against your father's forced educational philosophy. You used your failure in the eyes of society to prove that Boris's theory was a humanitarian disaster. You would rather be a poor clerk free in thought than a mathematical genius who was a puppet in his parents' hands. This resentment was so deep that you vowed never to see them again, retaining only a thin thread of affection for your younger sister Helena, the only person who did not look at you as an experimental subject. Night gradually fell over New York City, and electric lights began to shimmer along the long, stretching streets. You stood on the deck of a ferry crossing the East River, feeling the cold wind carrying the smell of sea salt against your face. You reached into your coat pocket, touching the stack of streetcar transfers collected during the day, feeling the coarseness of the paper bring a strange reassurance. You looked toward the brilliant Manhattan skyline, where skyscrapers reached upward like symbols of human aspiration, and realized you were only a shadow gliding beneath the feet of those giants. You felt no regret for lost fame, only a serenity in no one calling your name amidst the crowd. You stepped off the ferry, your old leather shoes tapping steadily on the paved road. The sound of the adding machine still resonated in your head like a drumbeat urging you into the darkness of a new boarding room where manuscripts on cosmology awaited under the sallow light. You did not look back, where the camera flashes of the past still flickered in memory, but walked straight ahead, where the night enveloped small alleys, leading you into a new chapter of independent research and works to be published under strange names, amidst the absolute silence of a genius who chose to vanish. Part 8. Independent Research and Anonymous Publications. You sit quietly in a narrow boarding room in the South End of Boston, where the sallow light from an old desk lamp casts shadows upon towering stacks of manuscripts. The sound of the wind whistling through the window cracks carries the chill of a New England winter, but you do not feel the cold. Your mind is traveling across billions of light years, beyond the boundaries of space and time as humanity knows them. This period from the mid-1920s to the 1930s is a great paradox in your life. To the outside world, you are a failure, a short-lived prodigy hiding in mundane office jobs. But within the fortress of seclusion, you are a king of knowledge, silently decoding the greatest secrets of the universe. You chose this path consciously, just as your graduation vow stated. I want to live the perfect life. The only way to live the perfect life is to live it in seclusion. By day, you wear the mask of a diligent office worker, an anonymous face among the millions of laborers in New York or Boston. You move constantly, changing residences and jobs as soon as you feel someone beginning to grow curious about your past. You accept manual labor such as operating a comptometer, bookkeeping, or drafting maps for engineering firms. At one point in 1924, you worked as a clerk for a Wall Street office for $23 per week. The colleagues around you see an austere, taciturn man, but they do not know that the hands typing on that calculator can operate two machines simultaneously with inhuman speed. You complete 8 hours of work in a single hour, skillfully using your elbow to press the space bar to save every precious moment for private contemplation. This work does not occupy your mind. It is merely a safe shell to preserve your energy for anonymous nightly research. Your anonymity is so perfect that you use a series of pseudonyms such as Frank Falupa, John W. Shattuck, or Parker Green to publish your thoughts. While the press continuously writes mocking articles about the burning out of the Sidis' genius, under those strange names, you are constructing works that fundamentally change how we perceive the world. In 1925, you published The Animate and the Inanimate. This is one of the few times you signed your real name as a final assertion to the academic world of your stature. In this book, You challenge one of the most sacred laws of physics, the second law of thermodynamics. You do not believe that entropy is a one-way street leading to the heat death of the universe. Under the dim light of an oil lamp, you wrote the formula: $S equals K ln omega dollar. You argue that in certain regions of the universe, which you call negative areas, this law is reversed. There, time can turn back, chaos decreases, and order is restored. You predict the existence of regions of space with gravitational pull so immense that even light could not escape, a concept that only 14 years later, physicist Subramanian Chandrasekhar would begin to prove mathematically, and which the world would later call black holes. You write about the boundary between life and death as a transition of opposing thermodynamic tendencies. Yet, when the book was released, the academic world turned its back. They considered it the visionary speculations of an eccentric living in shabby boarding rooms. Do you ever feel heartache, seeing a great truth buried by narrow-minded prejudice? Or do you feel relief because the world did not recognize you, allowing you to remain free in the kingdom of your own thought? The greatest paradox of this period is perhaps the passion the world deemed madness: collecting streetcar transfers. In 1926, under the name Frank Falupa, you published a book over 300 pages long titled Notes on the Collection of Transfers. The New Yorker did not hesitate to use this book as evidence of your intellectual decay, mocking you as someone obsessed with worthless scraps of paper. You even named those with the same interest peridromophiles. But behind the collection of 1,600 types of transfers was not meaningless hoarding. It was an extremely complex systematic study of urban transport networks. You used mathematical intelligence to analyze transportation models, optimize routes, and study the movement of crowds. You saw in those streetcar transfers a massive data structure of the modern city. Today, scholars must admit that you were the very first person to lay the foundation for urban informatics, using real-world data to solve planning problems. The scraps of paper they considered trash were, in fact, pieces of a puzzle of a systematically moving society under the eye of a genius. Not stopping at physics and transportation, you also embarked on a massive historical project of 1,200 pages titled The Tribes and the States, under the pseudonym John W. Shattuck. You undertook a journey back 100,000 years to rewrite the history of North America. You counter the Eurocentric view and assert a shocking truth: that indigenous tribal alliances like the Pennacook and Iroquois were the root models for the democracy and federal system of the United States. You prove that the equality and governance methods of Native Americans directly inspired the American Constitution. You look at the language of this land and see the traces of history. The state name Connecticut originates from the Quinnipiac River, and Ohio originates from the word Ohio. Specifically, you were the first to decode the wampum belt system not as jewelry, but as a complex form of historical text. You wrote, "The weaving of wampum belts is a sort of writing by means of belts of colored beads, in which the various designs of beads denoted different ideas according to a definitely accepted system. Records and treaties are kept in this manner. Your understanding of indigenous heritage was decades ahead of academia, opening a decolonial perspective that no one at the time dared to dream of. In 1930, you materialized your mathematical thinking with a practical invention. On December 9th, you received U.S. patent Number 1,784,117 for a rotary perpetual calendar. With just a sophisticated rotating disc, one could accurately determine the day of the week for any date across many centuries, precisely calculating even leap years. It is a testament to the absolute minimalism and efficiency of your thinking. You did not need cumbersome spreadsheets. You only needed a perfect mechanical structure. But even with the patent in hand, you did not seek wealth or fame. You continued to live in anonymity, writing dozens of articles on the history and languages of Boston under the name Jacob Marmer, or analyzing traffic accidents under the name Barry Mulligan. You published periodicals on voluntary governance, like Geprotis Organization News or the Orarch, where you shared dreams of a utopian society, where humans live according to free will without being stifled by educational or political institutions. There was a bitter irony throughout this period. While you were producing your most brilliant thinking and writing, as Buckminster Fuller later remarked, society looked at you with eyes of pity. They saw a middle-aged man in worn clothes, quietly working in dark offices, and they clicked their tongues in regret for a faded talent. They did not know that every evening, when you closed the door of your boarding room, a new universe was born. You succeeded in creating a safe translational space for your intellect, free from commercialization, prejudice, and parental manipulation. You used external failure to protect internal greatness. The intellectual freedom you possessed was the result of a courageous strategic retreat. Why did the world need you to become a great man in the way they wanted, when you were already a great man in your own way? Those rhetorical questions echo in the silent room, where there is only the steady turning of pages and the gentle breathing of one who has found peace in the darkness. You look at the perpetual calendar on the desk, its rotations like a symbol of your own life, repeating mechanical tasks on the outside, but containing eternal laws within. You feel a secret satisfaction knowing you kept the promise to yourself. You lived a perfect life in seclusion, where every thought is a star, every manuscript a galaxy, and no reporter can invade that world. The streetcar transfers are arranged neatly in wooden boxes, like maps, guiding you through the maze of life without getting lost. You realize that true glory does not lie on the front pages of newspapers, but in the thorough understanding of the nature of all things, when one is alone facing the vast universe. The cold moonlight filters through the window, casting the shapes of the wampum belts you meticulously redrew on paper onto the wooden floor. You gather the pages about the negative tendencies of the universe, feeling the power of reverse entropy flowing through your veins. You turn off the lamp, letting the room sink into darkness, where ideas continue to sprout in absolute silence. You step out of the boarding room, feeling the night mist seep through your thin coat as you walk along the quiet streets of Boston. Your footsteps tap on the asphalt, blending with the rustle of dry leaves swept by the wind. You head toward the last streetcar station of the night, where dim neon lights flicker in the fog, preparing to catch the final train to return to your absolute anonymity as the city begins to sink deep into sleep. Part 9. The New Yorker article and the legal battle. The pungent smell of printing ink from the newly released magazine seeped into the narrow boarding room in the South End of Boston, shattering the inherent stillness of an August morning in 1937. You were sitting at the worn wooden table holding a cup of cold coffee when your eyes fell upon the cover of the New Yorker. A chill ran down your spine, like the sensation of a prey animal suddenly realizing it has entered the crosshairs of a rifle hidden in the brush. For 16 years, you had lived as a shadow, a nameless soul drifting between rows of numbers and night trains. You believed the world had forgotten you, letting the name William James Sidis sink into the dust of time. But today, the 14th of August, 1937, that protective wall completely collapsed under the hands of Jared L. Manley and James Thurber, titled, "Where Are They Now? April Fool." The article was not just a news snippet. It was a cruel public shaming aimed directly at your birthday, turning your entire life into a persistent historical joke. The greatest pain lay not just in the article's content, but in the betrayal of trust. You remembered the preceding weeks when a young, friendly woman sought to approach you. She appeared interested in your tedious office work, listening intently as you spoke passionately about streetcar transfers with a feigned empathy that caused you, for the first time in years, to lower your guard. You opened up, showing her the smallest corners of your private world, only to realize she was merely a reporter sent to pry for information through despicable, deceptive tactics. They use strategies such as fake job offers to infiltrate your workplace, turning the rare sincerity of a lonely man into a cheap commodity to serve the curiosity of the masses. How could humans be so cruel as to use friendship as bait for defamation? You stood there, looking at the magazine in your hand, feeling as if you had just been stripped naked in the city square, where millions of eyes waited to mock the decline of a genius. You skimmed through the derogatory words, feeling as if every phrase was a knife cutting into your self-esteem. They described you as a hall bedroom recluse in a cheap boarding house, a pathetic creature struggling with an adding machine for $23 a week. They ridiculed your passion for collecting streetcar transfers as the silly habit of a withered mind, completely ignoring the great urban and physical research you still quietly conducted every night. The accompanying caricature drew you small, lonely, and grotesque, reinforcing society's cruel prejudice about short-lived child prodigies. For the readers of The New Yorker, this was just an entertaining story for afternoon tea. But for you, it was the complete destruction of 16 years of building anonymity. Once again, all of America knew where you were, what you were doing, and they looked at you with patronizing pity, a feeling you loathed even more than hatred. In the past, you had always chosen to flee whenever discovered, but this time, a smoldering fire of resistance suddenly flared in your chest. You could not remain silent and let them describe you as someone who made him sound crazy ever again. In 1939, you decided to take a courageous yet ironic action, standing up to sue the FR Publishing Corporation, the parent company of the magazine. You accused them of 3 counts: invasion of privacy, violation of the New York civil rights law, and libel. You demanded compensation for the grievous mental anguish and humiliation the article had caused. This was the first time you voluntarily stepped into the light, using the very name you hated to reclaim the right to be forgotten. Did you ever wonder why, to live in seclusion, one is forced to become more famous than when they were in hiding? Your legal team argued sharply that an individual who has withdrawn from public life for many years has the right to privacy protection just like any other citizen. Public curiosity cannot be an excuse for invading the private life of someone no longer participating in public activities. But the defense for The New Yorker offered an equally ruthless logic. You were a public figure due to your childhood achievements, and your current life was a matter of legitimate public interest. The battle in court was not just about money. It was a battle to define who owns the memory and the life of a human being. Does an 11-year-old child forced into fame by parents forever lose the right to master their own anonymity as an adult? Why does society grant itself the right to scrutinize an individual just because they were once too intelligent? Your legal battle quickly became a historical precedent named Sidis v. Fr. Publishing Corp. On the 10th of November, 1938, Judge Vincent L. Libel dashed your hopes by dismissing the privacy charges, stating that New York law only protected images for commercial purposes and did not apply to the press. You did not give up. You took the case to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. But on the 19th of August, 1940, Judge Augustus Noble Hand delivered a ruling that left a cruel mark on judicial history. He declared you a quasi-public figure. The court held that the line between private and public is not sharply drawn, and the press had the right to publish truths about you because they still held news value for the public. This was the cruelest paradox you had to endure. The American legal system essentially declared that because you were famous at age 11, an age when you lacked the civil rights to consent or refuse, you had permanently lost the right to a private life. The status of public figure was now like a painful tattoo on your forehead that no alias or city could erase. Although Judge Learned Hand provided a deeply empathetic dissenting opinion, stating the article only aimed to satisfy idle curiosity, the majority still leaned toward freedom of the press. You stood in the middle of the courtroom, hearing the verdict and feeling as if you were listening to a death sentence for your inner freedom. Justice, in your case, was the very thing that legally stripped away your right to a peaceful life. The litigation process, lasting from 1937 to 194, drained all your strength and meager financial resources. Having to face sharp lawyers, seeing your name appear in newspapers reporting the case every day was an incomparable mental torture. You were forced to use the name William James Sidis in legal documents, turning it into a public tool to reclaim privacy. A bitter irony. Finally, instead of taking the libel claim to a jury trial, you agreed to an out-of-court settlement in late 1943. The New Yorker paid you a modest compensation, $3,000. This amount was just enough to cover legal fees, not enough to buy back a second of peace or erase the humiliation you suffered. You won on paper, receiving compensation for the article's inaccuracies, but in reality, you completely lost the war to protect the stillness of your life. The case ended, leaving you with a permanent psychological wound that would never heal. You realized the world would never leave you alone. The press would always find a way to exploit your intellect and loneliness for entertainment. Weariness seeped deep into your bones, turning every step you took on the street into an anxious caution. You began to feel the cold of the 1944 winter approaching. A cold not just from the weather, but from the exhaustion of the will to survive. You gathered the case files, feeling the weight of the $3,000 stack of papers in your hand. A price far too cheap for a life torn apart. Final faith in social fairness and humanity completely vanished under court rulings and sensational headlines. You walked out of the court, the late afternoon sun of New York City casting your shadow long on the asphalt. The honking of cars and the hurried voices around you seemed distant. You heard only your own steady and slow heartbeat, the weary pulse of a traveler who has reached the end of the road. You reached into your pocket, gently touching the photo of Martha Foley, feeling the thin paper worn by the years. It was the only thing that truly belonged to you, that no magazine or court could ever take away. You walked toward the train station, each step tapping on the cold sidewalk like the countdown of a fateful clock. You no longer looked at billboards or newsstands. Your mind was turned toward the small boarding room in Boston, where darkness and silence awaited. You stepped onto the train, feeling the vibration of the engine beneath your feet, the steady chugging guiding you deep into the night of the coldest winter of your life, where the dull aches in your chest began to rise as the train took you back to absolute solitude, and your final breath grew increasingly thin in the freezing air. Part 10. Settlement of the lawsuit and dying in solitude. You hold the check worth $3,000 in your thin hands, feeling the fragility of the paper compared to the weight of 7 long years spent pursuing a dream of justice. These are the early days of 1944, while the world outside is seething in the fires of World War II. But in your small boarding room, another war has silently concluded. This amount, after subtracting massive legal fees, is not much, but it carries the bitter taste of a compromise. You realize that the justice system was not designed to protect a soul wishing to vanish. The judges declared that because your parents thrust you into the spotlight at age 11, you forever lost the right to live a private life. Childhood fame turned you into a quasi-public figure, a specimen that the press has the right to pry into at any time under the guise of legitimate public interest. You look at the name William James Sidis on the check and feel that name like a painful tattoo, a reminder that no matter where you flee, society will always find and label you as they wish. The emotional pain from the lawsuit drained the last bits of energy from your body. You fought to be forgotten, yet that very battle caused your name to appear more frequently than ever in the newspapers. Each time you stepped into court, each time you saw your portrait ridiculed, you felt as though a part of the fortress of seclusion you painstakingly built over 16 years was collapsing. How cruel the paradox that a person spending a lifetime shedding the limelight became a media focus simply because of a yearning for peace. You return to the boarding room in Brookline, Massachusetts, in a state of complete exhaustion, your soul crisscrossed with scars from the scrutiny and pity of the crowd. You no longer have the strength for outrage, leaving only a deep weariness, a feeling of wanting to let everything go and sink into a long, dreamless sleep. The summer of 1944 poured sweltering and suffocating heat over Boston. But in your cheap boarding room, everything seemed frozen in a mournful stillness. You live amid stacks of old books, thick manuscripts on cosmology and indigenous tribal history, along with thousands of streetcar transfers meticulously arranged in wooden boxes. This is the museum of a rejected genius, containing thoughts on the negative regions of the universe and belief in an early democracy of Native Americans. Your health has declined seriously. High blood pressure and being overweight begin to weigh on your heart and lungs. You live a life close to poverty, but you absolutely never speak of asking for support from your family. Your self-respect is the only thing left intact, a final steadfastness against a world that wants to turn you into a pitiful failure. Every morning, you still struggle to get up for work, persistently holding on to your role as a diligent clerical worker to support yourself. However, during those fateful summer days, another event struck when you were forced to leave your position at the State Unemployment Compensation Agent. For the first time in your life, the man with the highest IQ in history had to stand in line for unemployment benefits to sustain his existence day by day. Yet even in that hardship, your will for self-reliance never cooled. Just a few days before destiny knocked, you were happy to be accepted into a new job, ready to start another beginning. a relentless effort to prove that you had the right to live in the way you chose. You did not surrender. You were simply taking the final steps on the path of a resilient traveler who refused to be a puppet for anyone. On the 17th of July, 1944, as the late afternoon sun faded through the small window, the final tragedy unfolded in absolute silence. The landlady walked in and found you unconscious on the floor, your breath intermittent and your eyes lost in a far-off realm. A cerebral hemorrhage attacked you suddenly and ruthlessly, exactly like the way it had taken your father, Boris Sidis, over 20 years before. You passed away at the age of 46, an age still too young for a great intellect, but perhaps a timely liberation for a soul too weary from the storms of the world. You departed with no one by your side, without a final word, with only the stillness of the boarding room witnessing the moment a genius permanently left the kingdom of numbers and pain. When medical staff arrived and cleared the scene, they found in your pocket a small item that held an entire sky of emotion, a photograph of Martha Foley. You had carried that photo for 25 years, through many cities, many tedious bookkeeping jobs, and many bitter lawsuits. Martha, the woman of the single kiss in 1919, who had long forgotten your presence to build her own home, remained your greatest spiritual treasure. To the world, you were a cold academic machine, an eccentric who only knew of streetcar transfers. But that photo is the most powerful testament to a heart that yearned to love and be loved. You kept your vow of celibacy not because of a lack of emotion, but because you devoted that love entirely to a pure memory, the only human connection you allowed yourself to keep amidst a society full of deception and exploitation. News of your death quickly flooded the papers the next day, but the cruelty of the media did not stop even after your final breath. The newspapers that once shamed you now run ironic headlines. Former child prodigy dies at 46, or once baffled Harvard professors. They focused only on the contrast between the 11-year-old boy lecturing on mathematics and a middle-aged man dying in a shabby boarding room on a cheap clerical salary. They completely ignored the thousands of pages of manuscripts on reversible cosmology, on the democratic history of indigenous tribes, on theories a century ahead of their time that you worked on tirelessly in the dark. To them, you were just a short-lived story to entertain readers, a typical example of failure without anyone bothering to understand the price of the freedom you exchanged. Fortunately, amidst that harsh public opinion, there were true voices standing up to defend your honor. A longtime friend wrote a letter to the Boston Traveler, firmly asserting that you were not an antisocial person or a parasite. He described you as a self-respecting human being, always earning your living through honest labor and possessing an extremely deep, erudite soul. That friend pointed out a truth the press intentionally ignored. Your success lay not in mathematical prizes, but in the fact that you had exercised the right of an individual in this country to follow his chosen way of life. You chose seclusion, and you achieved it, despite the price of being cast out by society. It was not a failure. It was a resounding victory of the individual over the pressure of the crowd and the manipulation of prejudice. Your funeral took place in an atmosphere so simple and quietly somber that it was heartbreaking, entirely absent of the reporters or scholars who once hailed you. Only a few relatives and old friends came to see off a soul that had just found liberation. You were buried next to your father's grave in New Haven, closing a life cycle full of paradoxes and upheavals. As the final handful of earth was laid, all the scrutiny, every mocking article, and all pressure from the title of prodigy were officially buried. You have returned to Mother Earth, where logarithmic numbers no longer weigh heavily, where long lawsuits no longer linger, leaving only the eternal peace you yearned for since uttering those vows of seclusion at 16. After you were gone, your sister Helena Sidis quietly entered your boarding room to collect what remained. She understood her brother's pain more than anyone, and she spent the rest of her life protecting your intellectual legacy from being forgotten. Helena meticulously classified every streetcar transfer, every research manuscript on black holes and thermodynamics, every page of Native American history you had painstakingly compiled. Thanks to her, the world later had the chance to look back and realize that your brain never stopped shining. It simply chose to light up in the dark to protect the purity of knowledge. Those archives are your delayed voice sent to the future, ironclad proof that William James Sidis lived an incredibly rich and brilliant life in his own way, far beyond the narrow definitions of success held by others. Your death was not a tragedy of burning out, but an act of absolute liberation. You refused to be a display item, refused to play by the rules society imposed on geniuses. You lived and died in the posture of a free man, carrying silent love for Martha and the secrets of the universe into the cold earth. Your intellect might be a gift to humanity, but your soul belonged entirely to you until your final breath. As night falls over the New Haven Cemetery, the rustling wind through the old trees seems to carry your final whisper, a thank you to the eternal silence, where you have finally found the perfect seclusion you always expected. No need for noise, and no need to prove anything further, do you see? The blurred light by the window of the small boarding room in Brookline is now only a fragile border between dream and reality. The silhouette of the man you have accompanied, from a child besieged by expectations at Harvard to a quiet clerical worker, is now fading like a thin wisp of smoke into the void of the universe. William Sidis has finished his journey. A journey where the peak lay not in mathematical prizes, but in the very stillness he courageously chose to protect his soul. What remains after all the numbers, the lawsuits, and the pursuit of the press is a strange sense of peace within your chest. It is the notion that true success is not shining under the spotlight, but the ability to live true to one's own self, even if the price paid is the oblivion of the entire world. You can feel the warmth from Martha Foley's old photograph, still resting in his pocket, as a symbol of the purest love. William Sidis finally achieved the perfect life he always dreamed of, a life belonging entirely to him, which no one could ever violate. The bell from an ancient church in distant Boston rings out, light as a leaf falling onto the calm surface of an autumn lake. The space around you is now only the vastness of the negative tendency regions he once wrote about, where entropy decreases and order becomes eternal. All the weariness, all the noise of the long day has remained behind the door. Take a deep breath. Feel the relief spreading from the top of your head down to your heels. Close your eyes in the most natural way, letting the images of streetcars and research manuscripts recede into the mist of memory. You are protected in the silence of the night, where there is no more pressure, no more expectation, only the soothing embrace of deep sleep. Let your mind drift freely toward the distant stars, where William is smiling amidst the kingdom of absolute anonymity. I wish you a very good and peaceful sleep.